Yeah, a couple of things. I have the liberal class analogy that you're making is interesting, but I have a bit of a problem with it historically because, in my opinion, first of all, the Democratic Party was never a real friend of the working person or anything else. If you look back in history, I don't care whether you go to LBJ and the Vietnam War, or Truman and breaking strikes after World War II and the beginnings of the witch hunt, or if you go back to Wilson and World War I, even Roosevelt. What was Roosevelt's real role? Save capitalism so it would continue to exist, which he did. And sometimes you have to alienate fellow capitalists in order to save the system.
Well,
he was willing to do that.
That's my whole point, that was the function of the liberal class, to save capitalism. And I fully agree with you. And I began the talk by saying I'm not a liberal. But that is the role of the liberal class. But when those liberal institutions can't even do that, which they couldn't do, which is why we have a permanent underclass, then we are in a situation in which the rapacious and predatory nature of the corporate state is such that they can literally work and create conditions of such immense suffering that it begins to cause, quite literally, death.
Well, there's an alternative scenario, however, which is actually playing itself out right now in France, where the entire working class of the country, now being joined by students, are in open rebellion.
Well, that's the problem. I've lived in France, and that's the problem with the United States and France, that we are sheep. If you told French university students that they had to pay $50,000 a year to go to college, they'd shut the damn country down. All we do is, please, can we have another loan? Or, can I stay on my mommy's health insurance policy till I'm 26? It's just crazy.
But in fact, though, if we study our own history, we've had periods of great rebellion going back to the 19th century with the great strikes of 77, 94.
Well, that's a longer discussion.
The 30s. But
yeah, you're right.
What I'm saying is that I think you're painting too dark a picture, and that in the sense that don't give up on the American working class. It's only beginning to rub its eyes now and come out of the sleep.
Let's be clear.
All right?
We don't have an American working class. There's been a Weimarization of the American working class. What we call the working class now is a service class, where people have 2 and 3 jobs, where workers at Walmart who average 28 hours a week are below the poverty line. The possibility of a working class where one figure in a household could hold a job with a salary that could support a family, to buy a small house, maybe even send their kids to college with pensions and benefits, the corporate state has destroyed that. They've destroyed our working class.
Well, sorry, Chris, but once again, I think that's an often made exaggeration. In fact, the American working class in manufacturing still produces as much or not more than China does. But we haven't disappeared yet. I'm one of them, I happen to know. So again, I think we have to look to see that there's a possibly alternative outlook aside from sort of retreating into the village and pulling their house over our heads.
These manufacturing jobs that have left, whether it's in Youngstown, Ohio, or Camden, New Jersey, or Detroit, are not coming back. They're not coming back. And that's what makes this quote-unquote recession different from every other recession within the roller coaster ride of capitalism. We have allowed corporations to decimate our manufacturing base. We have shifted, in the words of the Harvard historian Charles Mayer, from an empire of production to an empire of consumption. And real wages in this country have declined since the early 70s. We borrowed, in essence, to maintain both an empire and a level of consumption that we can no longer afford. And, we're selling $2 billion a day in debt to the Chinese. We have racked up $12.8 trillion in debt, which, when we have to start servicing this debt, means selling about $96 billion of debt a week. And one day, it has to stop. It's not a sustainable system. You don't need Economics 101 to figure it out. And what happens then, if people don't want to buy our debt, is that the buyer of last resort becomes the Federal Reserve, which in essence means printing endless amounts of money. And at that point, our currency becomes junk. That's where we're headed. And we better start waking up, because if we don't wake up, we're going to get whacked. And the tragedy of American culture is that across the political and cultural spectrum, we are fed this mantra that if we dig deep enough within ourselves, if we focus on happiness, if we grasp that we are truly exceptional, if we find our inner strength, we can have everything we want. Reality is not an impediment to what we desire. And that's magical thinking. And it is rammed down our throats. Oprah does it every week. Everybody does it. And that, in essence, has created a culture that is probably the most illusioned culture on the planet. And an illusion is different from a dream. A dream is something you seek, you drive towards. An illusion is something that you live in. And when you live in an illusion, you remain in a state of perpetual infantilism, childishness. You never grow up. And now that gap is opening between the illusion of who we think we are and where we're going, and the reality. And when finally our personal world collapses, when it's our house that is repossessed or foreclosed, when we go bankrupt because we can't pay medical bills, when we finally grasp that that job we had is never coming back, not only for us but for our children, then we react like a child. We scream for a demagogue, for a savior, for some buffoon like Glenn Beck, who promises moral renewal, revenge, and new glory. That story is as old as time. Aristophanes wrote about it in the collapse of ancient Greece. I watched it in the collapse of the former Yugoslavia. It happened in Weimar. It opened the door for Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and that is where we are. That's the precipice we're standing upon.
Yes.